Hello, everyone. Welcome to the 18th Art Power Hong Kong online talk. My name is Enid Tsui, arts editor of the South China Morning Post, and I'm here with three guests today with very different backgrounds, but all very engaged in exploring the possibilities of art and tech converging. I shall introduce them one by one, and then they will each take about 5 minutes to talk about how their research and practices have shaped what they think about art tech. Today's panel is focusing on the visual arts. Art, tech and performing arts requires, I think, a different conversation. So let's start with Helen. Helen So is a researcher who leads the Arts Innovation Team at our Hong Kong Foundation, the public policy think tank founded by former Hong Kong Chief Executive Tung Chee-hwa. Her team released a research report in June 2020 titled Innovating Creative Cultures, Arts Tech. 5 months later, Chief Executive Carrie Lam, in her policy address, set aside 100 million Hong Kong dollars to make Hong Kong an art tech hub. Helen will tell us more in a minute. Jeffrey Shaw, artist, educator, academic, and leading thinker in the field of new media art. Among his many international roles, he is chair professor and former dean of the School of Creative Media at Hong Kong City University and co-founder of the Applied Laboratory for Interactive Visualization and Embodiment at the Hong Kong Science Park. Last but not least, Jonathan Prince, head of Jonathan Prince Studio and Berkshire House Digital. The sculptor is known for transforming industrial materials into works of art, has patents in optics and image projection, and has been exploring how art can mediate technological advances in society. So welcome all of you. I would like to invite Helen to kick things off first, and then Jeffrey and Jonathan will follow with their short remarks. Over to you, Helen.
Thank you, Enid, for the introduction, and hello, everyone. Thank you, Art Power, for having me. I'm Helen. I do policy research at our Hong Kong Foundation, and I'm just going to spend 5 or so minutes to tell you a bit about our report on art tech from last June, which was at the time the first of its kind in Hong Kong. So as Enid mentioned, although arts tech only became the hot topic in Hong Kong recently, we actually decided to embark on this quite a while ago, way before COVID hit. And actually Professor Shaw here could perhaps even attest to that, because Professor Shaw was actually one of the very first stakeholders we met with when we first begun this research. Anyway, so somehow I picked up on arts tech because I noticed, all the very culturally mature economies like the UK, South Korea, and Taiwan had already started, to begin to develop strategic blueprints to develop arts tech specifically. So I knew arts tech was going to be an imminent trend and that Hong Kong ought to study it if we are to stay relevant to the times. And then before we know it, COVID had struck and accelerated the digitalization of arts and culture to make arts tech the very relevant subject it is today. So our report basically contained some observations about arts tech with international examples. We also included some policy recommendations, as Eden mentioned, for Hong Kong. So I'll just give you a quick highlight of the gist of our research now, why arts tech is worthwhile, what it is, and it might give us more of a clue as to why it's entered the policy agenda. So I've prepared 8 slides. So just please bear with me for the next 5 minutes. I'm just making sure we can all see my screen. Perfect. Okay, first of all, so what is arts tech, right? So I'm sure the speakers after me will be able to give more concrete examples of their own works of arts tech, but my approach and my team's approach to this notion from a long while back pertains to the promotion of cross collaborations and synergies between arts and tech sectors, as well as consolidating the cultural and the creative sectors in Hong Kong. The arts, as we know it, is a way of expressing yourself. Technology is a way of communicating. So arts tech put together means tapping onto the new possibilities technology has enabled to express and communicate through art. And with technology's innate agility and versatility, it revolutionizes art in many different ways. And here are just some examples. So arts tech gives new possibilities to artists. For instance, the added dimension of interactivity, for example, could render new ways of audience engagement. Tech also reduces the boundaries between art forms. We see theatre blending with film, computer programming, merging with sculpture, ballet with fashion, gaming headsets even have started to enter spheres of opera. All of these carve out new audiences and new possibilities and revolutionizes how people perceive and consume arts and culture entirely. And in parity, arts can also unleash the creative potential of technology. The highly immersive and experiential nature of arts facilitates the effective communication of technology. Here is an example of a permanent art installation at CERN Center, which is co-created by artists and the engineers from CERN itself. And it's based on data from a nuclear research project that goes on at CERN. And actually, I know that Enid has just interviewed a local art tech artist who's actually working with former NASA scientists on the project about the moon. And Enid, I hope you don't mind that I quote something that you said. I really liked how this local artist put it. She says, "Whatever major breakthrough that I manage to make will probably mean very little to the scientific community. But what an artist ought to focus on is not just to reveal the way the world works, but also add human warmth." So I think that's very important. And so that's the point I want to bring out, is that the relationship between arts and technology is complementary. Arts need technology to remain relevant. Tech needs arts to fuel its imaginative possibilities and communicate those with the public. So the two should very much inspire each other, and each offers more dynamism to the other. Now, if we look at statistics, we can see the potentials of arts tech are immense. I'm going to draw your attention to the right-hand side. The pink line represents a sector within the creative and cultural industries, which is called the interactive media, software, and computer game sector, which is the main sector that drives arts tech development. The dotted grey line represents the whole cultural and creative industries in general. And we can see that over the last couple of years, the growth rate of the arts tech sector significantly outperforms that of the CCI on both GDP and employment fronts. So what does that mean? It means the arts tech sector is the main driving force behind the creative industry's GDP value increase, pointing to the immense potential for arts tech if talents across the industry are leveraged. Okay, so far we've covered how arts tech could affect artists, technologists, and industry. And our report also looked at the international examples and analysed the various top-down arts tech policies from these economies here. And we ended up submitting some policy recommendations for Hong Kong under these 4 policy arenas. First, we think it's a must to devise some sort of a plan, a blueprint of arts tech on a policy level that brings cultural and technology sectors to work together. And in that blueprint, there should be policies for funding. We obviously know what that is, and Enid has already kindly preempted that, as well as infrastructure, which means having space and venue for arts tech experimentations and R&D. And last but not least, there's networks and capacity building, because we find there is a big information gap between art sectors and tech circles. So some sort of platform, which is actually resembling the functions and the impacts of what Art Power Hong Kong are doing actually, would be necessary to create a network of expertise and sharing of best practices. The UK, for example, has a digital culture network, and South Korea has one that connects up academia, industry, schools, and governments. Now, obviously, we are quite pleased to know art tech made it onto the policy address, with policies touching on basically all the areas that we flagged up. But devil is in the details with the implementation. And so what I've been doing in this time has been continued advocacy work. We've recently spoken to the Hong Kong Science Park, for example, who have expressed intention to take a lead in this, as well as people from the film industries who reached out to us and mentioned the importance of back-end arts tech as well as front-end. They refer to it as content technology, not dissimilar to the AI algorithms behind Netflix or the data analytics behind ticketing platforms, for example. And we really think these are where discussions of arts tech could be heading. And I really think it is important to know what our end game for arts tech is, / what we want to make of it, rather than just let it float around, as jargon forever. So finally, there's just one final remark I want to make, which is that rather than asking arts communities to all ascribe to technology for the sake of it, our report basically brings to light the increasing presence of technology in our lives and how it can be an additional option for artists to incorporate it into their practice if it adds to their work. So tech may be a new form of canvas or a tool which has become more widely available for modern day artists, but the original principles of art as a form of expression has not changed. So if you believe art to have its own intrinsic value, this value should not change as a result of technology. It will always prevail. And with this, I realize my time is up, so I'm very happy to chat further later. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you, Helen, for that brilliantly succinct summary and introduction. The Hong Kong artist who I interviewed recently, by the way, is Phoebe Hui. Jeffrey, would you like to go next and give us a sense of what we already have in Hong Kong?
Good, thank you very much. Yes, let me just see if I can get my screen to share successfully. Just a second. Okay, can you confirm that my first slide is up?
We haven't been able to see anything yet.
I see, yeah. Okay, got it. You should see it now. You have my first slide? Good, excellent. Look, again, thank you very much for inviting me to contribute to this important discussion. Art and technology already has strongly established foundations in Hong Kong. And this provides excellent conditions for the convergence of culture, creativity, science, and industry to flourish here. Our art and technology prowess is very much bound to the fact that we have a well-developed community of world-class media artists and tech-savvy creatives. Furthermore, Hong Kong also has excellent and numerous educational platforms that are training and inspiring the next generation of art and technology practitioners. The practices of art and technology are also benefiting from the florescence of new cultural institutions in Hong Kong, which in turn is nurturing a whole new audience and public appreciation of these practices. Over the last 50 years across the world, there is accumulated evidence that government support of art and technology initiatives has been very beneficial on so many levels, and Hong Kong is no exception. In Hong Kong and abroad, there is a growing recognition of the synergy and symbiosis between artistic creativity and scientific innovation. And this is in line with the perceived need and absolute necessity to develop Hong Kong's homegrown IT capacities and competitiveness. And this is not merely an economic perspective. Everyone is coming to understand that a society's economic and social health in this age of radical technological transformation is tied to the meaningful cultural expression of these technologies. It is a social and existential necessity for technology to be shaped into valuable cultural assets and not just commercial enterprise. There is another special condition in Hong Kong for art and tech to flourish. China's profound technological ambitions infiltrates all sectors and also impacts Hong Kong's state of mind and mind of state. For example, AI, artificial intelligence, and machine learning are hot new research topics at both the Central Academy of Fine Art in Beijing and the School of Creative Media in Hong Kong. And exceptional advances, both scientific and aesthetic, are being made by artists, by our artists in these fields. Because Hong Kong is globally connected, a singular cosmopolitan city bridging East and West, a cultural and technological crossroads, it's truly a place where the art to come can flourish. And the art to come is going to be more and more influenced and informed by the current and emerging technologies to the benefit of art and society. Thank you for giving me this opportunity to introduce this topic.
Perfect timing. Thank you very much. Jonathan, perhaps now you can jump in and give us the international perspective.
Yes, well, thank you, Enid. And thanks so much to Art Power Hong Kong for inviting me to join you today. These were both, quick talks, but very inspiring. And really, so much is going on in Hong Kong. It's very exciting. Let me share screen with you and get started. So I'm going to give you a little background about who I am and the perspective that I bring to this conversation as a working artist with a working studio, and have been more involved in traditional works of art, sculptural works particularly. But I have a background that has always been interesting in the way that it brings perspective to technology. I've worked earliest as in the medical field as a maxillofacial surgeon, and then got involved with technology from the film business as a producer and technology specialist with television and film and computer animation companies. Ran a visualization company that created volumetric and holographic display and did projects with the Smithsonian, as well as running software companies that were working in the internet sector and creating authoring software for content creation. So I bring to this traditional practice of sculpture to a different perspective, and one that's always been looking for what this next generation of technology is going to bring to the world of art. My mission at the studio has always been to push materials to their greatest extent, to their limits. And I think that with digital media, that as material is no different. We have to find ways to push the technology to its limit. And we've been watching and waiting, and early on when I had done work with augmented reality in the late 90s. We had done work for Time Warner, CBS, and television programs. And actually, my company did win that Emmy Award for set design in technological award. But right now, things are happening in the 30-year cycle since the internet really started emerging as the next big thing. And certainly this idea of mixed reality with all of the technologies that are coming out now and the rapidity that they're coming into the world have become very exciting. So over these last few years, we've started at our studio to start looking at ways to test these technologies and push the limits. This is an example, I'm not sure how well the video will be running, but this is an example of mobile AR where we're looking at textural tests. This one over here is an example of a computer-based AR environment where the resolutions and the reality can really suspend disbelief. And on the bottom right-hand side of it is structured light, actually, which is projective augmented reality and tests that we've been doing here at the studio and ways to incorporate those kind of things into art as well, traditional art. For me, what's happening right now and what I'm seeing is that technology, it's very important. And a colleague and friend of mine, Sylvain Levy, told me that rather than art serving technology, it's important that technology must serve art. And what I'm finding now is everybody being very excited about what's happening with the technology and creating artwork that brings out the possibilities of that technology. But in my perspective, and again, coming from special effects industry and the film industry, I can tell you that the best movies and special effects can be interesting to look at, but they mean nothing to us unless there's story. And I think this idea of augmented storytelling is really crucial to where this technology is going to lead us and to let art mediate that technology in so many ways. And with that being said, this is a scene of a project that we're working on currently right now, where instead of just plopping down a work of art, whether it be a digital or a real sculpture with storytelling around it, in this particular case, this is a digital sculpture, but there's story, there's interactive places to go, and there's ways to navigate through it, questions that are asked, and ways for people to engage in the story that's happening around this work of art. We are actually at this point now working on several projects which combine traditional artworks and as well as digital works. And I've got the pleasure of working right now, we're in the midst of early part of the project with Zhangwan Studio in China, our studio here, and Sylvain and Dominic Levy at the DSL Collection as partners in creating this interactive and digital storytelling program that we're trying to bring together, experience really. I just want to summarize by talking about these particular points. Let me go back. That augmented reality will undoubtedly transform our visual future, and art will play an enormous role in this. That mixed reality will disrupt the conventional model of artistic presentation, taking art beyond the museum and physical gallery. That mixed reality will play a vital role in engaging younger audiences around new forms of art. That art is a powerful tool for urban regeneration, urban placemaking, and traditionally this has been the role of sculpture. It now can be the role of a much broader audience, and AR will greatly contribute to the future transformation of public spaces. I believe those are some main points that might be effective for this conversation today, and I'll finish here.
Thank you. Yes, there's a lot of what you've just said that I would like to revisit in a little while. But first of all, let's get back to that Carrie Lam policy address, which a lot of people watching in Hong Kong are interested in. She said there will be, apart from the $100 million budget, there will be an inter-bureau task force set up to promote arts tech. That sounds like a lot of red tape in the making. And in Hong Kong, unlike the US, for example, the arts do rely heavily on public funding, especially on the performing arts side. But with visual art, private sector sponsorship in engagement is growing, has grown a lot in the past decade. And Jeffrey and Helen, you are both advocates of government support in art innovation, but I mean, not all government initiatives in the creative industries have been very effective in the past. And in fact, I may ask you, Jonathan, to take this up because you have worked a lot with the private sector. Can you share a little bit from an international perspective, obviously, the pros and cons of working with the private sector to push the boundaries of art?
Sure. The United States has always really, sort of necessitated the notion that you have to work in the private sector because we don't have government agencies of significance that have funded private art projects easily. And so, yes, it does exist, but they're few and far between. So even in the film industry, And by the way, you know, as I've been thinking about this, I'm feeling more and more that this is essentially that the mixed reality sector is going to be more and more like the film industry in so many ways. In the early days of film, you know, very often you'd have to find ways to pre-finance with exhibitors perhaps, and financier exhibitors, which are really what movie studios are, and distribution houses. But the early way of making a film was to take it to the Cannes Film Festival or the American film market, take your project, find funding with a guarantee of distribution. And I think that that model actually will be very appropriate. And in some ways, it's really what's happening today. You know, we look for corporate sponsorship and funding, and we find that that corporate funding actually has a fantastic appetite for creating experiential art experiences for their clients. They want everybody to understand that they're contributing, that they want to play a part in this cultural role, which is so important. And even though you have to dig to find this kind of support, it does exist. And we're finding it, you know, something that is accessible when you look.
So Helen or Jeffrey, do you think that actually getting the private sector involved, especially since a lot of brands and companies are interested in engagement, is a more effective way of getting creative ideas into practice?
Can I? Certainly, when you use the word more effective, I have to disagree. It is certainly not more effective. It can be effective under certain conditions, and it can be welcomed under certain conditions. Many artists have benefited from partnerships with industry and with the commercial sector, and there's no doubt that this is one path that is open to us as artists. But industry tends to have its own, priorities, its own vision of where it wants to go. And if an artist is in sync with that, then it's fine. But I'm very much a defender of the artist's autonomy to research outside the boundaries, right, of what is currently, let's say, being imagined or being thought about, or what is being considered by industry as the product that they're looking for, right? So that kind of open-ended, experimental, and truly, let's say, art-based creativity, in the sense that it's really driven by the vision of art, without any, if we can talk about it as something which is, that has an identity, I think that really does largely depend on institutional funding. And that's been my experience in all the years I've been working in Europe as well.
Enid, could I just chip in really quickly, just to follow up on your initial mentioning of, the inter-bureau kind of task force. So it is true, it just sounds like, oh, would this be added bureaucracy? But I just wanted to just mention that, since this policy was announced in November, which was when the policy address was announced, we haven't had further updates regarding this inter-bureau task force. And it's actually quite, and it's the involvement of 4 different bureaus, actually, namely the Home Affairs Bureau, which oversees the Arts and Cultural Affairs, the Commerce and Economic Development Bureau, so the Creative Industries Bureau, as well as the Education Bureau and the Innovation and Technology Bureau. So we're talking about 4, big different policy bureaus coming together to formulate policies. And you're right, Enid, to say, we don't really have a very, very strong history of or track record for inter-bureau kind of collaboration within the Hong Kong government. But the thing is, I think it's really important for this task force to include industry practitioners and people within the industry and experts to be involved in a very kind of direct way to be able to offer feedback and offer industry expertise, so that to enable kind of policies of art tech to be formulated effectively and meaningfully. So and actually you can see there are a lot of different cases around the world, such as in the UK, they've got Undead, their cultural bureau. They have kind of mobilized some tech kind of specialists to spearhead the digital culture platform, for example. They call them tech champions. So there are lots of these kind of interdepartmental collaborations going on elsewhere in different economies. So yeah, so we just have quite high expectations for this task force, basically.
Good. And a member of the audience has actually written in to, as you were talking, to ask for more details of the kind of blueprint that you suggest may work for Hong Kong. I think you partly addressed that, but if the person who uploaded the question wants more details, do let us know and we can pick this up again later. I want to go back to what Jonathan was talking about earlier. What really made an impression on me was when you were talking about augmented reality helping to transform public space. Now, I immediately have this sort of dystopian scenario in my head where you have kids standing in the most horrible, polluted corner in the shadow of high rises, and whose only access to beauty is through AR goggles, or worse, VR. Do the three of you, are you concerned that technology has perhaps already caused enough disembodiment already, and that this may make us even more detached from the environment that we are living in? Anyone? Maybe it's something that Jeffrey can answer, because you've done a lot of work on the embodiment of art tech.
Well, I can point to one project we're working on at the moment with the Hong Kong Tourist Commission, which is an augmented reality project, which will be launched soon across Hong Kong, and basically will give people the opportunity to use their mobile device to actually get a panoramic view of the way Hong Kong used to look, exactly in the position where they are standing. So there will be locations all over Hong Kong where you can go and you can have a augmented reality view of Hong Kong at various times in the past in exactly the location where you're standing. Now, this augmentation, I think, is very thrilling, and it doesn't in any way, and I think we all agree that it doesn't distract from the real. Actually, the whole point of augmentation is to enhance and to enrich the real world. I mean, to stand somewhere in Hong Kong and see how it looked in the past is a way also of enhancing your experience of the present and to understand history in relation to the current situation. So I'm a big fan of augmented reality, and I'm a fan of it because in all my experience working with augmented reality, also in cultural heritage work, for me, it is a very powerful tool to enhance people's understanding and appreciation of the real world. Yeah, it's an imaginative and an experiential.
But then part of me thinks that it's the opposite, though. That is the opposite of imaginative, because instead of imagining, you are being given somebody else's imagination.
Yeah. But I mean, quite honestly, the proof of the pudding is in the eating. I've seen the pleasure and enjoyment that people gain from these augmented reality experiences. So it's not the disillusion you're talking about. It is really a positive force. We've done a lot of work with the Dunhuang Academy and the Dunhuang Caves. And we've done a kind of augmented reality, virtual reality reenactment of the Dunhuang Caves, We showed it a few years ago at the Smithsonian, and a lot of people came to visit who had visited the real Dunhuang caves.
Mm-hmm.
And I was a bit nervous because I was thinking, my golly, we're just doing something, this is not the real thing, people are going to be disappointed. And then I was doubly shocked because people who had been to visit Dunhuang were saying to me, this is better, right? And I'm saying, no, please, it's not better. I don't want it to be better. I want it to be a synchronous experience, a symbiotic experience with the real world.
Could I just add something concerning the performing arts and perhaps not augmented reality, but live streaming, which is very much, a core element of the performing arts industry right now. And so during COVID, obviously, and there was a window where we could still go to performances. It seems so far away in the distance now, that time. But so there was a performing arts production in a theatre, actually the Cultural Centre of Hong Kong. And it was done by Tsui, so one of the 9 major performing arts groups in Hong Kong. It was going to be a live piano performance with a live kind of storyteller. It was going to be like a duo between a storyteller and a pianist from Taiwan. Well, obviously that pianist from Taiwan couldn't fly over to Hong Kong. So that pianist stayed in Taiwan, and he live streamed his playing to kind of the audiences in Hong Kong who were in the Cultural Centre at the time. And actually the experience, like you would have thought, when I entered into the theatre, I would just thought, oh, okay, I'm not quite sure what I've come into, because am I just going to be watching 2 hours of someone playing the piano on the screen? But actually, the pannings and like the different kind of shots, the different camera angles, and like the zooming in and out, the lighting, the kind of the speed at which the director decides to change the camera angles, all of these actually ended up enhancing my appreciation of the pianist's skills, because you could actually zoom in. There was like an aerial shot, and you were able to see all the technicalities. Like, even if he were here live, I wouldn't be able to see all of these. So actually, just tapping onto what Jeffrey said about enhancing and raising the level of appreciation, that was definitely an experience for me in a performing arts sense, and like how technology has enabled me to kind of further appreciate that pianist kind of technicalities. And also it's definitely pushed performing arts onto a whole new level, like kind of the consumption of performing arts into a whole new level now, because I've seen something like that.
I mean, it's I totally agree with you, but we need another panel discussion for the convergence of tech and performing arts. But I am also slightly concerned when art and tech are brought together as the next big thing about accessibility. We're all talking about making art, especially contemporary art, more accessible. But already we've seen art tech projects, VR films that can only be experienced in art fairs, or in the past year with COVID, you can only really experience it if you have expensive headsets at home or the latest smartphones. And then on the making of art side, and obviously, it's very different from like in the 19th century, painters, because of technological advances, were able to use paint from a tube. It's very different from that. Inclusion in the art making process has made it necessary for artists to outsource or to learn new skills, very specialist skills. It all seems to be the opposite of accessibility. Jonathan, do you have thoughts on regarding my concerns?
Yeah, and also sorry about that. I had a dropout on my signal, so damn technology. What can you say? But but I'm back and happy to be here. Sorry I missed some of it. as technology is coming through, I mean, there's technology that's here today. There's technology that is bleeding edge technology, where we're looking at, because we're right at the very beginning of this technological renaissance, where computing power has really gotten strong enough, powerful enough, condensed enough that we can experience these things either remotely or through signals, 5G signals, or whatever it may be. So right now we're almost at the point where this is getting interesting. And because we're at the bleeding edge of this thing, we're always at the leading edge of the curve of where to be. So you need the latest device, the best equipment. It's going to be the best experience. I think that at a certain point, this will slow down and it will become more accessible for everybody to have with equipment that's out there. But for right now, and probably for the next 3, 4, 5 years, as wearable technology becomes available, Apple is going to be introducing their Apple glasses in the next year or 2 or 3, hopefully. And when that happens and people are using devices to have augmented reality as part of their everyday experience all the time, beyond the cell phone, it's going to really change the way things are in this world and the way that we consume every part of the world around us. So yes, I agree with you. It's limiting at this point. If you don't have LiDAR on your phone, you're not going to have as good an experience as if you don't. But that will stabilize at a certain point as the technology continues to develop. And really, it's very important to understand that even though we're doing amazing things and interesting things, we're at the very earliest inception point of where technology like this and visual arts can become interesting, I think.
Can I also share? I'd like to share something because, you know, at CityU in the School of Creative Media, we have a community of young students who basically are passionate about these new media and working with these new media. And it's true, there's certain levels of sophistication and complexity that are still, let's say, maybe difficult to achieve or maybe costly, but there is now so much out there that is instantly available. And I would say the skill set needed to download a bit of software and start using your iPhone as an AR interface is easier, simpler than learning the skills of how to paint. I mean, really, the skill sets for basic, doing, sort of basic stuff with new media is really quite straightforward. And because we're talking about art, we don't necessarily have to talk about quality at the level of a Hollywood production. If an artist can use very modest means to achieve a powerful artistic statement, this is sufficient, right? We shouldn't confuse ourselves and think, oh, high art needs high technology and the level of achievement. The level of achievement is measured in the art, not in the technology, right? The technology is there to support the artist, and the artist uses the technology pretty much at the level of their competence and at the level of their financial capability too, yeah? I'm always a little irritated by artists who say, oh, I want to be, I want to work with new media, but it's too expensive, so I can't make art. But that means they just simply can't make art because there's no excuse.
Okay. I'm sorry, Helen, before you give us your thought, there are quite a few questions coming in already, but there's one that perhaps I should pose to Jeffrey as a sort of a way to summarize your experience in what you in the project that you've been making yourself. Will art tech affect the human touch or strengthen it in the making of art? I think the question is, will it diminish the human touch or strengthen it?
It depends where you want to locate the human touch. Let's remember the moment when photography arrived and the painters went crazy. They said, this is the end of painting. Photography has destroyed the world of painting, right? It hasn't. it's become, photography is now, there's a deep understanding and a deep appreciation of what photography has contributed to culture, and the way in which photography has also enhanced the world of painting. Painting is deeply inspired by photography, and there's a very, very vital conversation. So the touch is not necessarily a manual touch. It happens at many different levels, because photography is, is apparatus. Yeah, it's you working with apparatus. Cinematography is also working with complex apparatus, but we cannot doubt the fact that the cinema is also a place of exceptional human touch, right? It's a deeply human experience. So let's not confuse, touch in terms of finger touch to, let's say, the touch, the emotional touch, the intellectual touch, the spiritual touch. That's where it counts.
Helen, do you have anything to add on the subject of accessibility and tech?
Jonathan, do you want to go first? Yeah.
Thanks, Helen. Jeffrey, I understand what you're saying, but I would also bring to mind the idea that when photography became digital instead of analog, we lost the touch of happy mistakes. When sculptures are being carved by 5-axis or 7-axis CNC machines, we lose the human touch. So I do believe that we do run into this danger. I don't believe it has to be there, but I would argue with Jeffrey that it is there now. It's a danger to all of us. And that I think that this notion of keeping humanity in the artistic mix is absolutely crucial to the experience.
Yeah, and sorry, I just wanted to add to the Enid's question about accessibility. So there is an argument that, blockchain technology, I don't want to open a different can of worms, but blockchain technology has really, there's one argument that says blockchain technology has actually in a lot of ways democratized kind of arts consumption. And I don't know if you would equate that to, making arts more accessible to kind of younger buyers or etc. So that's just, just putting one thought out there. And just tapping on to what Jeffrey mentioned earlier, I think we need to remember that the Gen Zs, for example, the next generation, they're going to be so technically adept. So they're how the difficulties that we find perhaps, catching up with the latest technology trends, well, we don't have to worry, because actually the Gen Zs, for example, they grew up in this world. So actually, it's going to be a lot. The entry barrier is actually going to be a lot lower for the up and coming young creatives, which is also why it is very important for us to be in this conversation about arts technology. How it affects and its relationship with society, really. That was just
but I need to point out that we've just had a question coming in from the Philippines. Say you to all panelists. Hi everyone, thank you for being here today. My question is, how would you suggest you promote growth with art and tech creativity in less developed countries? Here in the Philippines, the cultural and creative industries, as well as the tech industry, are still lagging behind. I'm currently just entering the arts and cultural sector, and I'm finding ways to bridge the gap with, between local and international trends. I'm not sure if you have an answer to what she's asking, but I think this is a good reminder that that in many parts of the world, this gap is very much real. Does anybody want to say? Yeah.
I'd like to say something. This is a very difficult problem. And, what Helen just said about younger, Gen Zs as digital natives, basically, they've grown up in a world that we don't necessarily, and certainly I will never understand at the level that they can understand it. And the way that they consume media is going to be different completely than the way Jeffrey and I are going to be able to look at it ever. And so that being said, I would also argue with Jeffrey about the barrier to entry for creating digital content at this point. as a person who's exploring the idea of how to get into it and how to do it, yes, you can create art in the simplest of forms. But for this question from the Philippines, there's no democratization at this point yet of how to enter the barrier of entry into creating digital art. When a person wants to do something on an iPhone or on their mobile device, they're actually sort of right now stuck with the idea of the simplest of ideas, filters in Instagram or Snapchat. Yes, you can create art and it can be meaningful, but to create absolute storytelling like we talked about before, the barrier to entry is very significant. You have to create your own app, essentially. You have to have developers to work with it. And one of the things about Berkshire House, one of the things we've tried to do here is to democratize the notion that younger artists can be supported in doing this kind of digital work. And so one of our agendas here is that we've actually begun work on creating an authoring platform in the digital world that will allow everybody entry at an easy level to start creating this kind of more complex digital storytelling. And we'll see where that goes. It's in early discussions right now, but we see the need for it, not just for us, but for everybody out there. And we want everybody to be able to create work. That's what's going to really create and promote the spread.
Sorry. I suppose that's why we need government and institutions to step in.
Absolutely, we do. We do. And don't forget, these institutions are actually crossbreeding across all of these channels. I mean, Apple Computer is in the movie business. You know, everybody is cross-fertilizing different fields. And it's to everybody's advantage to be able to find ways to utilize this technology. But let's not forget, when you look at technology in the past, technology is cold. And the way to warm technology, as Helen talked about and Jeffrey talked about, is to let art mediate that technology, to give it warmth, to give it a human touch, so that we can make it more accessible for everybody. That's what's really clear to me, and where we do need governmental support and industry support and corporate support to be able to bring this message to everybody.
Okay, we've got a lot more questions to go through. Sorry, Jeffrey, I'm not
Go
giving
ahead.
you a chance.
No, please. Question time.
To all speakers, the tech versus privacy debate. Should we be concerned on the boundaries of privacy, and should we let art tech grow or set a limit to it? Do we need to limit it? I suppose the question is it any different from technology, from the use of social media, etc.? Generally, is art tech any different?
Well, you know, I would have to say that it's really at the earliest stages right now. We don't understand the problems that it can create yet. We're just finding out right now, of course, you know, in the United States, especially through this last election that we just had here, we can understand the power of social media and the way it can be corrupted. We don't really even know the ways yet that art tech can be corrupted completely. And so I think that policy will have to emerge as we see problems arise. But at this point right now, I don't know enough to identify those problems.
Could I just add something there? I think that in the practice of art and technology, we have to understand that this is also a critical practice. In other words, an artist working with technology is not necessarily in love with the technology, is not necessarily embracing technology for technology's sake. Many artists working with technology have a very critical relationship to the technology. And then you have, and indeed, when you are facing topics of privacy and social media and the problems that are the social, let's say, problems that are being generated there, many artists in their art tech work are trying to address those issues. In other words, the artwork is addressing the problem of technology and the problems in which technology is becoming, is becoming more and more permeating society. So we must understand that art tech is also a critical practice.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm just thinking of works like, the film that Xu Bing did, is it Dragonfly Eyes? People who use basically found footage to create works of art. That sort of thing. That I suppose that's where privacy may come into it. And also, I remember, Xu Yiqiang's Taipei Pavilion presentation in Venice in 2019. There are lots of cameras. Everybody who walked in, they would be captured on camera and kind of scanned, did a body scan. Yeah, so yes, I think the member of audience who asked that question, you're probably onto something. Yes, this needs to be discussed. Okay, more questions for Jonathan. From his slides, he mentioned that he would like to push the materials to their limit in his sculptural work, more in a traditional sense. How do you apply that in the AR settings? So,
Yeah.
okay.
So, it's interesting. This has been, part of just my life and my choice. And so because I come from the film industry originally, and then I started seeing artists creating video art, I felt disappointed in a lot of the video art that was being created because it was, very immature as far as the state of technology goes compared to special effects company and everything in the movie business. And so what it really, and to Jeffrey's point, it really doesn't have to be incredibly sophisticated to be good art. And I had to learn that. But my own particular practice has always been, and this is a personal choice, has always been about pushing the boundaries of the material that I work with and the technology that I work with. So I'm interested, yes, I'm interested in creating a Snapchat or an Instagram filter as well, if I can create some storytelling around that makes sense. But at the same time, I want to work with the technologies that are pushing the boundaries as well. And so, we may be, and we're seeking collaboration with Microsoft for HoloLens on a project. And we're working potentially with Apple and seeking their advice on how to integrate with their wearables. That is just my particular choice of how I go about these things. But there are so many ways and so many levels to do this that can be equally effective art making.
I think this is a really important point, Jonathan. Every artist chooses the context, the technological context in which they want to work. And if you say I've got to work with HoloLens, which is an expensive device, and then you have to create a path to it that allows you to get access to these resources. And actually, for me as an artist, my whole life, it's always been a struggle to build a context or to position myself in a context where I could fulfill certain, you could say, dreams or certain ambitions in terms of my art practice. But it depends where you pitch your ambition. And it depends. Every artist, will in the end choose their own productive framework, and that involves will choose the technologies in that work. If you're making a sort of $50 million movie, right? It's a $50 million movie, but you can also make a $1 million movie. And you choose which kind of movie you want to make, and you make the effort to make it. If you want to make a $100 million movie, then you have to make a special effort to be in a position to do that.
Sorry, we've got 2 minutes. We've got 2 minutes left. I just want to read out a comment from Carla Poli saying, as regards to accessibility, I think she hopes to see that advances in tech will make a difference to what audiences can see and experience and bring hidden art pieces out of storage. So much is hidden away. Good point, Carla. Now, sorry, this is selfish. This is just me wanting to know. Jonathan, can you tell us, how much can you tell us about that project you're working on with Zhang Huan?
Well, I can say that there's this is an era of collaboration. And this is really where I believe that digital art making has contributed greatly. So in my practice, through the last 20 years or so, as I'm creating sculpture, I get inquiries all the time of people wanting to collaborate. And I never could figure out how to do that. Do I add a piece of steel and they add a piece of steel? What's a collaboration on a sculpture? But now, all of a sudden, there's a way to collaborate. There's a way to collaborate across all lines, because I can now I'm very inspired by Zhang Wan's ash paintings. And I think that we are exploring, in a lot of my spiritual context of my work, we're exploring similar themes. And for me, and obviously for Zhang, we both are thinking how interesting it is that we're from such different cultures and different parts of the world, and yet we explore similar themes. And so in this particular thing, the notion of augmented reality or mixed reality in this context is really a curatorial exercise. And what I mean by that is curation has been mostly a cognitive disconnect between the artwork and the curation. You can write down what it's about, you can show a video about what it's about, and then you look at the artwork and it's separate from. Well, with augmented storytelling, this notion of this disconnect between curation and art is now brought into one place. And so all of a sudden, between Zhang's ash paintings and my sculptural works that are exploring these themes, we can tell a story that connects the two of them together. So there's a collaboration in storytelling. There's also a collaboration, like the movie business. Who's helping us develop this? Who's creating? Who's doing the digital works? I'm not the 3D computer artist that's going to be working here. We have to bring in other artists and collaborators. So all of a sudden, this particular project becomes a collaboration and a production that is, it may be not the $50 million scale of the movie, Jeffrey, but it's whatever budget we can figure out how to get there so that we can involve more and more people. But the story is going to be told. It's going to be told whether it's a $1,000 budget or a $500,000 budget. We're going to tell it. And the more available participants we have, both financial and creative, the richer the potential for the story to be. And that's what's so exciting about this digital revolution that's happening now in the visual world.
Thank you. Well, we'll keep an eye on that. And I'm afraid this is all we've got time for. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. And thank you, Helen, Jeffrey, and Jonathan, for the lively discussion. See you all next time.
Thank you, Enid.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank
you, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.